Russia is plundering Africa to pay for its war in Ukraine, and the Wagner Group is the tool making it happen. With the help of the notorious private military force, Russian President Vladimir Putin is turning an entire continent into his own private cash machine. The recent rebellion by the Wagner Group against Moscow had many thinking that the ties between Putin and this private military force had been severed. For 2 tense days in June, the world watched with bated breath as Wagner Group mercenaries moved from Ukraine into Russia and took control of the southern Russian city of Rostov. But even as the Russian army was setting up defenses in Moscow to prepare for a fight for control of the capital city, a truce was declared. The Wagner Group would withdraw from Rostov and go to Belarus. So as long as they stayed in Belarus, Russia wouldn't pursue treason charges against Wagner soldiers or its leader Yevgeny Prigozhin. To many, it seemed like that was the end of the Wagner Group's work with Russia. But recent reports out of Moscow suggest that when it comes to Africa, the Wagner Group remains Russia's tip of the spear, the force by which Russia is taking control of an entire continent, one country at a time. So what is Russia doing in Africa? Why is it succeeding in turning one country after another to its side? And what does this mean for the long-suffering people of the world's poorest continent? In this video, we will answer these questions, but before we begin, make sure to hit the subscribe button to get notifications on all our latest news and analysis. And if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button and help us spread the word. This past spring, a civil war erupted in the East African country of Sudan. As the violence escalated and the death toll mounted, attention turned increasingly to an element of the war that might surprise those who haven't been following African news: the involvement of Russia, specifically the Wagner Group. For at least a year, Western intelligence agencies have been raising the alarm about Russia's involvement in Sudan, specifically the Wagner Group's activities in the country. Multiple reports have emerged that the Wagner Group is smuggling large amounts of gold out of the country. It's unknown just how much gold has been smuggled from Sudan to Russia, but intelligence sources on the ground say it's a significant amount. Gold is Sudan's major export, according to 70% of the value of all goods exported from the country every year. In fact, a recent report tabled in the British Parliament quoted a source inside Sudan that Wagner Group's gold smuggling operations in the country are critical to Russia's ability to withstand the significant sanctions deployed against it for its illegal invasion in Ukraine. So how is it that the Wagner Group is able to smuggle gold out of Sudan? The Wagner Group's head, Yevgeny Prigozhin, owns a gold processing facility in the country. The Moreau gold processing plant, which has been sanctioned by the U.S., is owned by M Invest, a corporation owned by Prigozhin. It's part of a vast and shadowy network of businesses and paramilitary groups controlled by Prigozhin across numerous African countries. On top of that, Russians are buying gold from other mines on the black market, and at bargain basement prices, about $4,000 per truckload. According to U.S. intelligence officials, Russia has a quid pro quo agreement with the leadership of the Sudanese government. The government looks the other way as Prigozhin's forces smuggle gold out of Sudan, and in exchange, Russia gives military and political backing to Sudan's increasingly unpopular military government as it violently puts down the country's pro-democracy movement. And it's not just Sudan. According to the British parliamentary report, Wagner mercenaries have been active in the Central African Republic, Libya, Mozambique, and Mali. Over the past 6 years, Russia's tentacles have extended across the African continent, and even though Prigozhin and his Wagner network often work in their own interests, they have also been a main tool of Russian foreign policy in Africa. The Wagner forces have been so successful in expanding into Africa that the British parliamentary report concluded that there are serious national security threats to the UK and its allies of allowing the Wagner network to continue to thrive, not to mention devastating human consequences, including contributing to the refugee crisis, for example, in Sudan. But this is not news to U.S. intelligence agencies. According to a leaked trove of secret documents obtained by the Washington Post earlier this year, U.S. intelligence has been fighting a shadow war against Prigozhin's Wagner Group in Africa for the past 6 years, and it hasn't been going well for the U.S. According to the Post, there is little in the trove to suggest that the CIA, Pentagon, or other agencies have caused more than minor setbacks for Wagner. So why is Russia succeeding in Africa? Why can't their forces be stopped the way their forces have been frustrated in Ukraine? The answer to that has to do with Africa's history of being colonized by European powers. Go back 100 years and virtually the entire African continent was under the control of European colonial powers, but Russia wasn't one of them. The French, the Belgians, the British, even the Germans and the Italians held territory in Africa, but not Russia. And when Russia became the Soviet Union, its communist government declared itself to be anti anti-colonialist, and for decades it helped African political and military movements to fight against colonial rule. Today, Russia is benefiting from that reputation, and Putin knows how to take advantage of that reputation in Africa and how to expand it. Last month, 17 African heads of state went to St. Petersburg, Russia to attend the latest Russia-Africa summit. Tellingly, Wagner chief Prigozhin was seen shaking hands with African leaders at the summit. It certainly looks like he isn't in exile in Belarus anymore. At the summit, Putin announced Russia would be sending free grain to 6 African countries: Burkina Faso, the Central African Republic, Eritrea, Mali, Somalia, and Zimbabwe. Putin criticized Ukraine for sending its grain to wealthy European countries, while many poor countries in Africa and Asia are on the brink of starvation. But what he didn't mention is that the grain crisis unfolding in underdeveloped countries is largely his doing, the result of the war in Ukraine. Until the war, Russia and Ukraine were among the world's largest exporters of grain to developing countries. Just days before the Russia-Africa summit, Putin pulled out of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, a UN-backed agreement to keep the grain flowing while the war carried on. Putin also didn't mention that the grain he's sending to Africa would be paid for by the oil-rich Gulf state of Qatar and not by Russia, and that Qatar hadn't yet agreed to the idea. Putin knows how to play to the African people's sentiments, to the tendency of many Africans to see Russia as the good guy. But with the Wagner Group's expansion into Africa, cynical national leaders have been using Russia's power to keep themselves in power, and even to wage brutal wars against their opponents. In a recent report, the humanitarian group The Sentry laid out the Wagner Group's involvement in the Central African Republic, where civil war has been raging for 20 years. 5 years ago, Russia offered Central African Republic President Faustin Archange Touadéra the support of the Wagner Group in the ongoing armed conflict. According to The Sentry, what resulted was a campaign of terror. While various armed groups have continued to commit egregious human rights violations against civilians under the cover of a counter-offensive against anti-Touadéra armed groups, Wagner, Touadéra, and his inner circle have perpetrated widespread, systematic, and well-planned campaigns of mass killing, torture, and rape throughout the country. Executed by Central African Armed Forces and Wagner fighters backed by militiamen, these campaigns of terror have served as psychological warfare to force anti-Touadéra militiamen and their allies to accept defeat, and the broader population to accept the authority of Wagner and of Russia's ally, Touadéra. The war in the Central African Republic has been utterly brutal. A recent study found that 5.6% of the country's population, more than 1 in 20 people, died in 2022 alone. That's twice the death rate of any other country in the world. And the Central African Republic is not the only place where Wagner Group troops have been accused of atrocities. Last year, the French government accused the mercenaries of staging a false flag operation designed to blame France for mass deaths. A French intelligence aircraft captured images of what France says are Wagner Group troops shoveling sand over a pile of partially buried bodies. The bodies were found near a military base that had been recently handed over by the French to the Malian armed forces as part of France's withdrawal from the country. A day after French intelligence took the photos, a Twitter account known to be sympathetic to Russia posted a video showing close-up shots of the dead bodies. France says the bodies may have come from the town of Hombori, where reports have emerged of human rights abuses being committed by Malian troops working with Wagner Group mercenaries. U.S. officials say this fits the pattern that Russian forces often follow: commit an atrocity, then make it look like it was carried out by an opposing power. Western intelligence agencies estimate that there have been around 1,000 Wagner Group troops operating in Mali since that country's government invited them into the country in 2021. But today, the biggest flashpoint in the ongoing conflict between Russia and the West over Africa is in Niger. On July 26th of this year, members of the country's presidential guard moved against President Mohamed Bazoum, seizing him and his family. A few hours later, a group of soldiers appeared on TV and announced they had overthrown the government. They said the country's borders had been shut and announced a curfew. Niger plays a crucial role in the global economy. It is the source of 5% of the world's uranium used in the generation of nuclear power. It's especially important to France, where 70% of electricity is generated in nuclear plants. France gets about 20% of its uranium from Niger. The French company Orano, which is 90% owned by the French government, operates 3 uranium mines in Niger. So it's no surprise that France has been leading the Western world in condemning the coup in Niger. And as the unrest in the country continues, it's beginning to look like Russia could get involved here as well. A few days after the coup, Evgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner Group chief, went on social media and blamed the coup on European colonialism. He also accused Western countries of sponsoring terrorist groups in the country. country. According to Prigozhin, what happened in Niger has been brewing for years. The former colonizers are trying to keep the people of African countries in check. In order to keep them in check, the former colonizers are filling these countries with terrorists and various bandit formations, thus creating a colossal security crisis. But then Prigozhin appeared to make a sales pitch. The population suffers, and this is the reason for love for Wagner. This is the high efficiency of PMC Wagner, because 1,000 soldiers of Wagner are able to establish order and destroy terrorists, preventing them from harming the peaceful population of states. In other words, Prigozhin wants the new military government of Mali to bring Wagner into the country so it can make money on yet another African civil war. And it seems like the new military regime likes this idea. On August 6, with the threat of foreign intervention hanging over them, Mali's military leaders openly asked for help from the Wagner Group. If the Wagner Group gets involved in Niger, it's entirely conceivable that Russia will end up with control of the country's uranium reserves. It could become yet another source of plundered wealth for Vladimir Putin. With the support of Western governments, a group of West African countries, known as ECOWAS, has given the military junta in Niger a deadline to remove themselves from power or face a military intervention. As of the time this video was made, the deadline had just passed with no response from the junta, and the Wagner Group had not publicly responded to the junta's request for help. But if it comes to pass that the Wagner Group enters Niger and the African countries under the ECOWAS umbrella also enter Niger to restore the previous government, then this country, and potentially all of West Africa, could end up in the middle of a proxy war between Russia and the West. It's unclear who would be the winner in such a war, but the losers will almost certainly be the people of West Africa. If you like this video, hit the like button, which helps us spread the word about our channel. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications on all our latest news and analysis. In the meantime, check out one of these videos here to learn more. Thanks for watching.